Hello there and welcome to World News Program, streaming to you live on All 24 News. I'm your host, Karifa Zachary, and up next are the headlines. Occupation forces ramp up their attacks, hitting various areas hard. 63 Palestinians were killed in 8 massacres in just one day. Jabalia hindered over 100 airstrikes, while 19 were killed in bombing in Deir al-Balah. Dozens are killed and wounded in simultaneous Zionist raids on Rafah, prompting Palestinian calls for international protection for the Kuwaiti hospital, with 300,000 Palestinians displaced. UNRWA refutes claims of safe zones in Rafah. That's next. Also coming up, Palestinian resistance accuses Biden of backtracking on ceasefire talks. Fuel in Nusayrat is running out, and southern Gaza braces for internet shutdown amid Zionist attacks. Also ahead, Russia seizes 4 new towns in Kharkiv region. Ukraine faces widespread Russian bombing along border, citing tough conditions. And 4 killed in Belgorod border city raids. Stay tuned. The details are right after the break. Hello again and welcome to the program, and let's get into the details. First off, in our topical news, in the last 24 hours, 8 Zionist massacres in Gaza left 63 dead and 114 wounded. Since October 7th, over 35,000 have died and nearly 59,000 injured. The occupation forces are now intensifying the attacks, demanding displacement in north and south regions. In Rafah, 16 Palestinians, including children and women, were killed by the airstrikes, prompting further displacement. Over 100 airstrikes hit residential areas and shelters, triggering deaths and a mass displacement toward western Gaza City. Zahra Farjani has the details in this report.
Another day of onslaught in Gaza. Civilians who were seeking shelter in Jabalia camp have become strategic targets for the Zionist occupation, who has set their sights on eradicating any trace of Palestinian resistance since late last year.
Downright injustice is for the girl to be the sole survivor of her family, a child not even 4 months old. Her entire family was martyred, leaving no one to care for her. She needs her mother for at least 5 or 6 years. Her mother, father and siblings all martyred, leaving no one from her family.
This was the morning in Jabalia camp. Zionist bombardment barely ceases before resuming even more intensely, leaving dozens of civilians dead, many still trapped under the rubble. Since last night, the entity began deploying its military vehicles around the camp, backed by warplanes and drones, to target anyone attempting to move in the area, even if it were ambulances.
The race didn't cease for a single moment on the homes of safe citizens, as well as on the battalion centers, streets, and roads by the Israeli occupation forces. We hear now new shelling in Jabalia camp. The airstrikes haven't stopped at all. There is also intense and heavy gunfire on battalion centers, housing thousands of displaced people, with these centers being surrounded by fire from aircraft.
The intensity of the bombardment and the possibility of the Zionist military invasion expanding have forced many here to flee to uncertain destinations, which may not be any better than Jabalia.
What happened with us is that they dropped flyers on us to evacuate the camp as there will be strikes. We left the camp, but we don't know where to go. We don't know where to head. We don't have food, drink or clothes.
After enduring prolonged siege and starvation, the occupying entity resumes its assault on the displaced in Jabalia camp, which has remained defiant against the occupation forces and their vehicles since October 7th last year, and may continue to stand as a symbol of Palestinian resistance.
And at dawn on Sunday, occupation aircraft struck various areas in Gaza, marking the 219th day of the ongoing war. In a Zaytun neighborhood, 2 martyrs and 5 wounded arrived at Al-Ma'madani or baptized hospital due to heavy gunfire from Apache helicopters. 3 raids near Hassan al-Banna Mosque had or led to 1 martyr and at least 6 injured. In Deir al-Balah, the bodies of Dr. Muhammad Nimr Kassat and his son, Dr. Yusuf, were recovered after a targeted raid.
Shame on them. We're dead. We're really tired. We are tired from seeing the killed people, the weak financial situation, and from the lack of gas. We're tired.
He was just praying Al-Asr, and then he went to his house to sleep. The airstrike him. Why? What did this civilian do to them? He is a civilian, not a soldier. Our children got an airstrike while being inside the house. My son was a doctor, and he didn't belong to any faction, and he only minded his own business. He got killed on my lap. I fell from the roof, and my son was telling me, "I'm next to you, Dad. Please take me and don't take my son."
Dozens of Palestinians were killed in a severe Zionist bombardment of Rafah city on Sunday. Meanwhile, UNRWA confirmed the displacement of approximately 300,000 Palestinians from Rafah just last week, denouncing the ongoing forced displacement that is inhumane. More with Usama Ayadi in this report.
Explosions and large plumes of smoke rose over the skyline of the Rafah region in the Gaza Strip for the 6th day in a row. The region that was not long ago considered a safe haven for the unarmed civilians is now another scene for the Zionist war of genocide that is taking more lives.
My children and I ran under the fire and people died in front of us. The shrapnel hit our faces. God didn't want us to be harmed. The houses were hit by strikes while we were running. Our situation is so bad. While we were running, my children and I hurt our legs.
The toll rises at every hour as the Zionist onslaught have left no stone unturned, reducing entire residential buildings into dust. The continuous Zionist military assault kills dozens of civilians every day, and every corner of the city witnesses funerals of more victims of this merciless war of genocide.
I wasn't planning to leave, but I will leave now, because there is no one else left in the camp, so I need to leave. I'll try to sort out my situation, search for my wife and daughter. I hope God would bring the good. This is the last thing we can say.
The Zionists say that he called for Palestinians in more areas of Rafah to evacuate and head to what it calls an expanded humanitarian area in Al-Mawasi, in a further indication that the military is pressing ahead with its plans for a larger ground attack. More than 300,000 Palestinians have once again been displaced from central Rafah towards the south, and the so-called humanitarian areas seem to be another lie of the entity, following a series of crimes and the targeting of what was meant to be a humanitarian haven.
There is no safe place. The situation is very hard. There is no food, no drinks, even the water is hot to get. My children cry and tell me, "Mother, we want to drink and I don't know what to do."
Despite heavy international pressure and alarm expressed by residents and humanitarian groups, the Zionist entity persists in proceeding with an incursion into Rafah, where more than 1 million displaced people have sought refuge during the 7-month-old war.
And Rafah's Kuwait Specialized Hospital, the last healthcare facility operating in the area, is on the brink of closure due to depleting fuel and supplies. This intensifies the dire health crisis in Gaza, especially after the recent Zionist military raids on Rafah. Here's Salman Asib with the details.
Faced with dwindling reserves of fuel and supplies, one of the largest hospitals in the Gaza Strip, the Kuwaiti hospital, is on the verge of putting away its stretchers and closing its door in the next 72 hours. Doctors in Gaza warning the health services will collapse if the entity does not allow the resumption of fuel deliveries into the war-battled Palestinian Gaza Strip.
We're facing a catastrophic situation where the entire healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. In the entire Rafah region, only Kuwait Hospital can provide medical services 24 hours a day. As the Rafah terminal is completely closed, we don't have fuel to run the generators. We will most likely stop medical services within 72 hours, and we cannot get enough fuel for the generators. The only hospital still receiving patients in Rafah will soon be closed.
The medical team is urgently appealing for a halt in hostilities and global aid to address the critical conditions in Rafah, emphasizing the severe lack of medicines, medical resources, and healthcare workers.
We're facing a dire situation with a serious shortage of medicines, medical supplies, and health personnel. In addition, there are no field hospitals left. Only the western region, such as Al-Mawasi, has field hospitals, but it is difficult. It takes at least 2 to 3 hours to get there. As a result, the sick, injured, and dead find themselves alone in the streets, facing their fate. The whole world should spare no effort to immediately end this invasion. What we need is an immediate ceasefire.
Amidst a raging situation, Shihada is urgently endeavoring to relocate her son, afflicted with a head injury and amnesia, to the European hospital in Gaza for additional medical assessment. He was hit by a speeding truck while crossing the street. We brought him here. He suffered a head injury. He doesn't remember how he got here. He was going shopping at that time. He no longer remembers who I am. He has amnesia. It is therefore necessary to transfer him to the European hospital in Gaza for further examination. The Palestinian Civil Defense in Gaza has reported a critical situation in the northern part of the Strip, where medical services and humanitarian aid for displaced people have ceased. The rescue organization have suffered an 80% loss of capabilities, with appeals to international institutions going unanswered.
All right, let's move on to a different story now. Volker Turk, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, stated on Sunday that a large-scale attack on the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah cannot be allowed. He emphasized that such attacks and recent evacuation orders in civilian-heavy areas are violations of international humanitarian law.
I'm deeply distressed by the fast deteriorating conditions in Gaza as Israeli forces intensify airstrikes on Jabalia and Beit Lahia in northern Gaza and in parts of central Gaza. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are fleeing Rafah after the Israeli Defense Forces ordered further evacuations from the southern city, leading afresh to massive displacement of an already profoundly traumatized population.
And on Sunday, the European Union condemned the Zionist occupation's coercion of Palestinians in Rafah to relocate to unsafe areas. Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, called for increased efforts to halt the entity's ground operations in Rafah. He also warned that such actions would worsen the already dire humanitarian crisis in the Strip.
Forcing civilians to evacuate Rafah to unsafe zones is intolerable. Israel is bound by international law to provide safety to civilians. We continue to urge Israel not to go ahead for a ground operation in Rafah. This would further exacerbate an already dire humanitarian crisis.
Hamas condemned the U.S. President Joe Biden's statements favoring the Zionist entity, where he linked Gaza ceasefire to the release of what he termed hostages. In a statement, Hamas accused Biden of biased support towards the Zionist government, granting political cover and military aid for their actions against the Palestinian people.
This position of President Biden reaffirms the American bias towards the criminal policy led by the Nazi Zionist government and its continued provision of political cover and military support for the war of extermination it is waging against our people, and allowing more time for the terrorist occupation army to complete its operations of destruction, killing, and annihilation in the Gaza Strip.
Gaza authorities warn of imminent fuel depletion in Nusayrat, central Gaza, within just 48 hours, endangering over 300,000 displaced residents. Mayor Ayad Maghari urges intervention to prevent a humanitarian crisis, citing the cessation of vital services due to the occupation's blockade of fuel tankers. The Palestinian telecommunications company reported a fixed internet outage in southern Gaza Strip areas due to ongoing Zionist aggression in Rafah. In a brief Facebook statement on Sunday, the company assured efforts to swiftly restore services. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated his call for an immediate Gaza ceasefire and urgent and restricted humanitarian aid access during an international donors conference in Kuwait.
I repeat my call, the world's call, for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and an immediate surge in humanitarian aid. But a ceasefire will only be the start. It will be a long road back from the devastation and trauma of this war.
Libya has been accepted by the International Court of Justice to join South Africa in the genocide case against the Zionist occupation. Coordination with Arab League, Palestinian supporters, and Latin American countries ties or has been confirmed. The deadline for written comments on Libya's request is July 10th. The aim is to condemn the occupation for genocide, supported by a comprehensive memorandum documenting violations in Gaza and the West Bank. In Madrid, thousands marched in solidarity with Palestine, demanding an end to the aggression against Gaza and the severance of ties with the Zionist entity. Commemorating the Nakba anniversary, demonstrators condemned occupation crimes and showed support for Palestinian resistance.
It seems to us like an insufficient step because first one must recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, decolonization and liberation. Recognizing the Palestinian people without knowing in what borders and under what conditions, without talking about the settlements that are devouring the territory of the Palestinian people and expelling them from their land.
Expulsando al pueblo palestino de su territorio.
We're receiving quite mixed opinions. On one hand, they say they're proud of us. On the other hand, they say politics should be kept out of classrooms, even though there has always been politics in universities. But we don't care about opinions. What matters to us are actions, and we see that there is a lot of talk but little action.
And in New York City, thousands closed the Manhattan Bridge on Sunday, demanding an end to the genocide or war in Gaza. They called for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the U.S. military aid to the Zionist entity, resulting in numerous protesters' arrests. Similar massive demonstrations occurred in Seattle, St. Louis, and Brooklyn. To different news now. The African Fertilizer Summit held in Nairobi, Kenya from May 7th to the 9th concluded by adopting Algeria's proposal to support gas producers crucial for agricultural fertilizer production. The summit endorsed the declaration from the Gas Exporting Countries Forum hosted by Algeria in March, emphasizing the need to boost gas production. Bahrain has expressed interest in investing in Algeria, particularly in food industries, pharmaceuticals, petrochemical industries, and transportation. A meeting between the Bahraini Minister of Trade and Industry, Abdullah bin Adel Al Fakhru, and Algerian Minister of Trade and Export Promotion, Taib Zitouni, affirmed their commitment to boosting investment opportunities through the activation of a joint commission. On Sunday, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported gaining control of 4 more towns in the Ukrainian Kharkiv region adjacent to Russia, following the start of Moscow's ground operation there 2 days prior. Concurrently, Ukrainian army commander admitted to his forces, or that his forces are facing challenges in the ongoing Kharkiv region conflict. Ukrainian authorities also evacuated over 4,000 people from border areas with Russia.
Special attention is paid to the Kharkiv region. Defense battles, fierce fighting continue on a large part of our border strip. There are villages that have actually turned from a grey zone into a zone of hostilities, and the occupier is trying to gain a foothold in some of them, while others are being used to advance further.
Governor Oleg Senigobov of the Ukrainian Kharkiv region reported constant Russian fire along the northern border. The Russian Ministry of Defense stated it intercepted 6 attack drones and 2 ballistic missiles launched by Ukraine targeting Russian territory. The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations reported 4 fatalities in a Ukrainian strike on a building in the border city of Belgorod. The ministry later updated that 2 more bodies were found under the rubble, bringing the total to 6 casualties. And in Lithuania, voters participated in presidential elections on Sunday. Reports indicated 8 candidates, including incumbent President Gitanas Nausėda, vying for the position, with no candidate likely to secure the required 50% of votes for a direct win. A runoff on May 26th may be necessary.
I want homeless people who live in the streets or in shelters to always have a place to take refuge, and that people with disabilities and blind children are better taken care of.
And in a different African development, Benin faces food price hikes amid global geopolitics and border closures with Niger. Thousands protested in Cotonou against the soaring cost of living. Here's the details with Sofiane Kantourina.
The streets of Cotonou echo with the voices of discontent. Thousands of Beninese citizens have taken to the streets, expressing their frustration over the skyrocketing prices of essential goods and the deteriorating quality of life. In fact, the main reason of the deteriorating situation in Benin and the prices increase was the closure of the border with Niger, the country's main trading partner.
Everything has become expensive, and we are calling on our leaders to think of us so that we can have a little respite. Even in our homes, we have problems because our husbands refuse to tell us that money is not enough for us.
The soaring prices of basic foodstuffs and basic necessities make access to adequate food difficult for many families. The actual situation pushed people of Benin to cry out for help and demand immediate action to ease their suffering and ensure a fair chance at decent life.
A hunger stomach has no ears. We've suffered so much from hunger in this country that we've ended up being exasperated. So, at some point, we had to raise our voices to let the current leaders know about our misery and our difficulties. We will end up dying with all this. How are we going to do with this price increase? It wasn't like this before. We have other expenses to pay, including our rents and taxes. We need the power in place to think of us, because we also contributed to him being elected.
Beninese people express their despair at a situation where even the most basic needs are becoming unaffordable, calling for urgent action to alleviate the suffering of the population and ensure equitable access to the resources necessary for life.
And finally, to a lighter note on our news bulletin, the 4th edition of the Imdrasen International Film Festival kicked off in Batna, eastern Algeria, featuring films from 17 countries. This edition honors Palestine, chosen as the guest of honor by the organizers.
هذه طبعة ودورة لفلسطين الشقيقة.
This edition is for our brotherly country, Palestine. It is to discuss this cause and internationalize it. Honestly, the movies which were produced are numerous, over 160 movies. We picked 21 movies, amongst them were Palestinian ones.
The end of our program. Until next time, bye-bye.